My name is Rob Johnson. I'm the president of the Balmoral Beach Club. I've been in the club about 17 or 18 years, and I'm very privileged to be the president in what's our centenary year.
Hello, my name's Kieran Kelly. I've been a member of the Balmoral Beach Club since 1998 and I'm now the Vice President. I first came to the club after a severe injury and I was told I would never be able to swim again. And a friend of mine said, "You might like it down here." His description of it in total was, "They're good blokes." Well, Balmoral, as anyone can see who's been here, has always been a place of preeminent natural beauty. As white society grew in the area and Mosman developed, it wasn't initially a place for bathing, it was more a place for recreation and promenading. From the 1890s onwards, several things developed. One was swimming and of course the development of the artists' camps, the en plein air painting movement that moved the easel and the paint box outside. And distinguished artists such as Streeton, Roberts and Ashton all painted here as far as we know. And indeed there was an artists' camp right on the spot where the Balmoral Beach Club now is. You can imagine in those unhurried days of yore when they brought their paint box and easels to this place, it would have been quiet with only the birds singing. So it would have been an idyllic setting in which to create great art. The club started in a barber shop up in Mosman where these young men all met each other, and I think it's rather wonderful. The smugglers, as they came to be known, the men who first met in the barber shop, established themselves in a colony here, although they were not themselves artists. They were a diverse group of men. They were all bound together obviously by a love of the beach. There was a shack on this site that they occupied. But the first clubhouse wasn't built until after what we know as the Balmoral Beach Club was incorporated in 1914.
Balmoral Beach Club, minutes of meeting, held at Mosman Town Hall, 12th of July 1914. Alderman Pickett, Mayor, in the chair. The meeting, which was a public one, was called with the intention of forming a club at Balmoral Beach.
The first committee of the club was composed not so much of the smugglers themselves, but from some very high-profile members of the community. Well, I'm familiar mostly with Ryrie because at the time he was arguably the best-known Australian alive due to his World War I service at Gallipoli and also on the Western Front. The first patron was William Cullen, who at that stage was not only the Chief Justice of New South Wales, but I believe he was also the Governor. Right from the start, women were welcome here. And in fact, women have played a pivotal role throughout the entire 100 years of its history.
Women have always been very influential in the club. When the club was established, it was Ellen Lay who actually allowed them to use her property to start meeting. And she was the first ladies president in 1920 when women were allowed to join again. We have got evidence of women racing against the men. There was one particular race where we've had about 5 women and 6 men race. That was in 1928. But swimming fell away. And it only really, women started racing, I suppose when changes started happening in society, they were more interested in racing. 65, 66 was when we first had official mention of women in races, and that started with women races only, but then pretty soon they were part of the races going on. You'll find that in all the races there are now women.
The amphitheatre itself was a semi-religious building built by the Theosophist Society, but the Balmoral Beach Club was able to utilise it by putting a shark spotter up there, who was then in communication with the club, which had a bell. That bell continues to this day to be hung in the club premises. Well, of course, there was enormous attempts to ban female bathing. In fact, there was enormous attempts to ban any sort of bathing in the period running up, certainly in the 50 years running up to 1914. There was a movement, though, to establish in-harbour bathing facilities, and they existed at places like Clontarf and on the southern end of Balmoral. So by the time this club was formed, there was an increasing acceptance of the health benefits of bathing, and that it was something that could be enjoyed by both men and women. The club's actually always had a strong tradition of trying to encourage swimming amongst children. That is really ingrained deeply in the Australian culture. What the Maraths did in encouraging swim lessons here was very much part of the Australian culture. It's culminated, interestingly enough, in the formation of a very large Neighbours program with 600 to 700 kids here. The men who came back from World War II were largely in the AIF, and I think they brought back an AIF type culture, which was based on egalitarianism. Some of them had been in prisoner of war camps, and they understood the value of mutual support and mateship. They wanted to keep that egalitarian culture. Some of them were officers and some of them were enlisted men, and they seemed to mix quite freely here. There was a strong ethos amongst those returned servicemen to honour the fellows who didn't come back, to bring some of those Australian Army traditions to life here in the club. Our most prominent trophies still are named after World War II servicemen. Part of the service that the club rendered to those World War II ex-servicemen was therapy, to get over the horrors of what they'd experienced, to try and put their lives back together with their families and with their friends. This is a great support network for people. The way sport and the members have interacted has changed and evolved. When the club was formed, it had many of the elements of a traditional surf club. They proposed to buy a boat and they proposed to patrol the beaches and act like a surf club. During the 1930s, they did have some surf carnivals here. They had march past competitions and that type of surf club event. This club can lay claim to being one of the great founders of long-distance competitive swimming. In its day, the Jack Cox was the longest ocean swimming race in the country at 1,500 metres. The results were published in the Sydney Morning Herald, and indeed it used to attract quite a bit of media coverage. From that, we've gone on to swimming races of all sorts of distances, even up to 2, 4 and 6 kilometres now. 365 days of the year, there is an organised swim here. Many people said to me, I can't come down to the Balmoral Beach Club because I can hardly swim. And I say, well, look, I can hardly swim either, but it doesn't matter. That won't stop you going in a race. The competition is always friendly, and indeed the races are always handicapped, so that the elite swimmer actually suffers in this club because he's always down the back and he is often beaten by lesser athletes. Isn't that charming? And let's hope it always stays that way. Well, there's only really been one shark attack here we know of. In fact, if you look at the number of people who swim here every day and the length of time over which they've been doing it and the lack of shark attacks, it's really tremendous evidence that sharks aren't a great threat to humans. The vast numbers of people that swim here every weekend, and in fact every morning, from 5 a.m. when it's pitch dark till 9 a.m. and it's a testament that there's not too much danger from sharks. Like many people, I've swum in the solstice swim, and you're swimming here in the middle of the night practically. The club itself became famous in some respects for holding social occasions, black tie dinners. Various balls were held here over the years, and it was a place of very formal entertainment, it would seem, particularly immediately prior and just after the Second World War. The social side of the club has changed a little bit in how it's used. It's not quite so formal here. The club gets involved nowadays in going places all around the world and all around Australia and doing interesting, unusual things. And Storytellers provides a very good venue to allow people to talk to those club members who can't go to those particular activities. What you realise is that the Balmoral Beach Club is a group of people, and the building is only secondary. This club has never had a liquor licence, and it's never had a poker machine inside it, and yet it continues to flourish. A lot of people have said, how do you do this? How do you keep it so well funded and keep the fees low? Well, it's in the very simplistic nature of the club and what it tries to do. If you ask many members of this club, particularly the active ones, they would say the same thing, that this is a vital part of their life.